It is almost 10 p.m. on January the 17th, 1961. In the dense bushes of Katanga, a southeastern province in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Police Commissioner Franz Verschoor guides a local force. His orders are clear: dispose of the bodies of Patrice Lumumba, the recently ousted Prime Minister of the Congo, and two others in a shallow trench. Out of habit, Verschoor glances at his watch, noting the time of the execution: 9:43 p.m. Beads of sweat trickle down his face, drenching his hands with a sticky film. Though he cannot see it, he knows that it is blood. How did the blood of the Congo's leading politician end up on my hands? He ponders. Suddenly, the headlights illuminating the gruesome scene flicker off, enveloping everything in absolute darkness. On the 18th of October 1908, the Belgian parliament voted to annex the Congo as a Belgian colony, putting an end to King Leopold II's brutal 23-year reign, a reign which saw the population of the Congo cut in half. However, with the Belgian government taking control, the circle of brutal exploitation and violence persisted, albeit to a lesser extent. The colony was overseen by a governor-general and initially divided into 4 provinces, but a reform in 1932 expanded the provinces to 6, each governed by a provincial governor. The provinces were Leopoldville on the west coast, Equator to the north, Oriental to the northeast, Kivu to the east, Kasai in the country's center, and Katanga in the southeast, which had a more intricate administrative structure. In the 1940s and 50s, urbanization swept across the Congo, resulting in a remarkable expansion of the wage labor force, surpassing that of any other African colony. This rapid urbanization gave rise to a burgeoning middle class of Europeanized Africans, known as the Evolués. Although there are no universal criteria for defining the status of an Evolué, individuals with some form of post-primary education, a strong command of the French language, and adherence to Christianity and European values often qualify. In 1957, Ghana achieved the historic milestone by becoming the first independent nation in Black Africa. Subsequently, France made preparations to grant independence to all of its African colonies. These events ignited ambition in the Congo, particularly amongst the Evolués. As they mingled and shared ideas, discussing the vision of a post-colonial Congolese state, nationalism began to brew. Soon, various parties and groups began to emerge, but they were broadly divided along ethnic and geographic lines. Among the earliest organizations was the Alliance of Bakongo, ABAKO, led by Joseph Kasavubu. Initially a cultural association, it served as the primary ethno-religious organization for the Bakongo people. However, in the mid-1950s, ABAKO transformed into a strong voice against Belgian colonialism. Whilst Kasavubu's ABAKO insisted on immediate independence and emphasized ethnic determinism, the Congolese National Movement, the MNC, advocated for a gradual approach, striving to establish a unified and centralized Congolese nation. Led by the charismatic Patrice Emery Lumumba, the MNC became the largest and the most influential force dedicated to achieving independence. Another influential nationalist party at the time was the African Solidarity Party, the PSA, led by Antoine Gizenga. It maintained close ties with the MNC and did not align itself with any specific ethnic group. Advocating for a federalist state and provincial autonomy of Katanga was the Confederation of Tribal Associations of Katanga, CONACAT. It was led by a Katangese businessman by the name of Moise Chombe. However, Konakat faced formidable opposition in northern Katanga in the form of the Balubakat Party, led by Jason Sendwe. On the 28th of December 1958, Patrice Lumumba organized a successful rally for the MNC in Leopoldville, the country's capital. Lumumba, who had recently attended the All African People's Conference in Ghana, brought significance to the gathering. Wary of being overshadowed by Lumumba and the MNC, Kasavubu of the Abaco decided to hold his own event a week later. He requested permission to use the prestigious Young Men's Christian Association building in Leopoldville for the meeting, but the municipal government, given the short notice, only authorized a private gathering. Furthermore, the officials warned the party leaders that they would be held accountable if the event turned political. However, on the day of the rally, a large crowd gathered at the building only to discover that the authorities had banned the event. Following this, Kasavubu and other Abaco officials made desperate attempts to send the protesters home, but they failed to quell the growing unrest. Soon, violence erupted and rocks were hurled at the police, whilst white motorists faced relentless attacks. As the rioters entered the European section of the capital, they looted and set fire to numerous European storefronts, passionately chanting the words, "Indépendance immédiate." Finally, order was restored after the government deployed its colonial army, the Force Publique. Consequently, Kasavubu and other Abaco leaders were arrested. The Leopoldville riots marked a turning point in the Congolese liberation movement, as it was the first time that the desire for an independent nation was passionately expressed not only by the educated Evolués, but also by the largely uneducated masses. This development caught the Belgian authorities off guard, compelling them to confront the profound challenges gripping the colony. The arrest of the Abaco leaders put the MNC in a favorable political position. However, they soon encountered a significant challenge that threatened to undermine their newfound advantage. Discontent arose within the MNC among some members who grew uneasy with Lumumba's control over the party and his seemingly moderate beliefs. Spearheading this movement were Albert Kelonji and Joseph Ileo. They advocated for a more radical approach focused on federalism as opposed to Lumumba's vision of a strong centralized state. Soon, relations between Lumumba and Kalonji grew tense, and as a result, in July 1959, the MNC broke into two factions. The MNC Lumumba, led by Patrice Lumumba, and MNC Kalonji, led by Albert Kalonji. Despite the split, Lumumba's faction continued to rapidly gain support, forging alliances with other regional groups. However, in October 1959, Lumumba would be arrested for inciting a riot that resulted in the deaths of 20 people at a rally in the country's eastern city of Stalinville. Following the riots in Leopoldville, the security situation across the country continued to deteriorate. Facing immense pressure and fearing the escalation of a colonial war, the Belgian government took action. They organized a roundtable conference in Brussels, inviting leaders from all major Congolese parties to participate in discussions about the nation's political future. The meeting outlined the future of the Belgian Congo and set the date for its independence as the 30th of June 1960, with elections scheduled to be held a month prior. But while a resolution was passed for the organizational structure of the state, crucial matters such as federalism, ethnicity, and Belgium's future involvement in the Congo remained unresolved. Patrice Emery Lumumba was released in time to join the Congolese delegation. Accompanying him was a relatively unknown sergeant who would later become a dictator. This sergeant was a man by the name of Joseph Desire Mobutu. The general elections to the Congo took place on the 22nd of May 1960, and Lumumba's MNCL emerged victorious, winning the majority of seats. Consequently, Lumumba became the prime minister and Joseph Kasavubu from the Abaco, who ranked third in the polls, assumed the presidency. Furthermore, Antoine Gizenga from the PSA was appointed as the deputy prime minister. On the 30th of June 1960, the Congo became an independent nation. During the independence ceremony, King Baudouin of Belgium delivered the first speech presenting the end of colonial rule in the Congo as the culmination of Belgium's civilizing mission initiated by King Leopold II. After the king's speech, Joseph Kasavubu, the newly appointed Congolese prime minister, delivered a brief and uncontroversial address expressing gratitude to the king. However, the highlight of the ceremony occurred when Joseph Kasongo, the president of the Congolese Chamber of Deputies, who presided over the event, invited Lumumba to deliver an impromptu speech.
Battant de l'indépendance, aujourd'hui victorieux, je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. À vous tous, mes amis, qui avez lutté sans relâche à nos côtés, je vous demande de faire de ce 30 juillet 1960.
Although the independence of the Congo is being proclaimed today, no Congolese will ever forget that independence was won in struggle. It was filled with tears, fire, and blood. We have experienced forced labor in exchange for pay that did not allow us to satisfy our hunger. Morning, noon, and night, we were subjected to insults and blows because we were Negroes. Who will ever forget the shootings that killed so many of our brothers, or the cells into which many who no longer wish to submit to the regime of injustice, oppression, and exploitation were thrown? Today, the Republic of the Congo has been proclaimed, and the future of our beloved country is now in the hands of its people. I call on all Congolese citizens, men, women, and children, to set themselves resolutely to the task of creating a national economy and ensuring our economic independence. Eternal glory to the fighters for national liberation. Long live independence and African unity. Long live the independent and sovereign Congo.
Lumumba's speech ignited a standing ovation from the audience. He had just eloquently articulated the heartfelt aspirations of his people. Although the speech was well received in the Congo, it faced widespread international condemnation for being unnecessarily confrontational and showing ingratitude towards Belgium. Seemingly disgusted by what he had just heard, King Baudouin stormed out of the room, only to return after receiving assurance that Lumumba would provide further remarks to clarify his intentions. Finally, the ceremony concluded when the representatives of both countries signed the official Act of Independence. The 30th of June fell on a Thursday, and with it came the long weekend of festivities in the month of July. Throughout this period, the Congolese army, the Force Publique, maintained law and order. However, little did they know that a chain of events was about to unfold that will forever alter the destiny of this newly independent nation. For a long time, the Congolese army had been characterized by racial segregation, which persisted even after independence. Many black soldiers had assumed that independence would bring about immediate social change, so they resented the continued presence of Belgians in important positions. To address this issue, the Congolese cabinet convened on the 4th of July to discuss army reform. Meanwhile, at Camp Leopold II, the primary installation in Leopoldville, some Congolese officers started exhibiting acts of indiscipline. They believed that as the Congo had gained independence, they were no longer obligated to follow the orders of their Belgian commanders. At about 5 p.m. on the 4th of July, General Emile Yenses, the commander-in-chief of the Force Publique, arrived and confined the undisciplined soldiers to a holding cell. Yenses, who had become aware of the government's intention to establish a committee to reorganize the army, was outraged at not being consulted. In response to the growing unrest amongst the Congolese ranks, he summoned all troops on duty at Camp Leopold II. During the meeting, he wrote on a blackboard, "Before independence equals after independence," to underscore that Belgian officers will continue to lead the army even after independence. This greatly angered the Congolese soldiers. That evening, in protest against Janssens, they looted the camp's canteen. In response, Janssens contacted the reserve garrison of Camp Hardy, located 95 miles away in Tilsville, and requested a convoy to be sent to Camp Leopold II to restore order. However, the officers at Camp Hardy mutinied and took control of the armory. The next morning, these soldiers drove from Tilsville to Nkisi, Mandiba and Banzamboma, spreading the mutiny in the process. Meanwhile, Janssens finalized plans to attack Camp Hardy and informed the commander of the Belgian Metropolitan Troops in the Congo, but the government countermanded his order and instead dispatched Sergeant Joseph Mobutu and other top officials to negotiate with the mutineers. Subsequently, on the 7th of July, the Congolese government began formal negotiations with the mutineers and focused on the Africanization and reorganization of the army. The severity of the mutiny had convinced them that radical reform was necessary to maintain the army's discipline. To appease the mutinous troops, Lumumba dismissed Janssens and promoted all black soldiers by at least one rank. The army was also officially renamed the Armée Nationale Congolaise, ANC. In addition, Lumumba appointed General Victor Lundula, a World War II veteran, as the army's commander-in-chief, and Colonel Joseph Mobutu as the army's chief of staff. However, both appointments were ill-advised as Lundula lacked the necessary qualifications to oversee a modern army, and Lumumba made a grave mistake regarding Mobutu. His overconfidence in commanding the loyalty of those around him led him to disregard credible rumors about Mobutu's ties to Belgian and American intelligence services. By appointing Mobutu to such a critical position, Lumumba unwittingly chose his own Judas. 2 days later, the government delegations left the capital to oversee the Africanization of the ANC. Whilst Mobutu traveled to the Equator province, Kasavubu and Lumumba went directly to Matadi, where tensions were rapidly escalating. In the provinces of Kivu and Oriental, European officers smoothly transferred control to the Congolese without incidents. However, in Katanga, the government's decision to Africanize the army created anxiety among the European population, who feared that such a reform would lead to the collapse of domestic security. As a result, the provincial government in Katanga refused to support the Africanization efforts and directly appealed to Belgium to intervene and resolve the situation. Meanwhile, in Brussels, reports of conflicts and abuses against the Europeans intensified public pressure on the Belgian government to take action. By mid-July, an undisclosed number of Europeans, particularly Belgians, had been killed. Belgian Prime Minister Gaston Eyskens grew deeply concerned about the situation, especially when many Belgian civilians started to seek refuge in neighboring countries. In response to these challenges, he sent 2 Belgian officers to Leopoldville,
Kanshof van der Meerswalter and August de Schrijver.
Since both Lumumba and Kasavubu were absent at the time, the officials met with Deputy Prime Minister Antoine Gizenga. They issued an ultimatum to the Prime Minister, formally requesting Belgian military assistance from the Congolese government. They also warned that if their request was ignored, the Metropolitan troops would take independent action to safeguard Belgian citizens. When Lumumba and Kasavubu learned about the planned Belgian intervention, it greatly disturbed them. They knew that the Belgian government would not provide guarantees regarding respect for Congolese sovereignty, and as a result, they subsequently requested the withdrawal of all Belgian troops from Congolese soil. But regardless, Belgium's decision to intervene ultimately prevailed. At approximately 6 a.m. on July the 10th, Belgian metropolitan troops from Kamina flew to Elisabethville, the capital of the Katanga province, and occupied the local airport. That evening, news of the Belgian intervention reached Lumumba, and he did not hide his frustration.
We have just learned that the Belgian government has sent troops to the Congo and that they have intervened. We protest bitterly against these measures which prejudice good relations between our countries. We appeal to all Congolese to defend our republic against those who threaten it.
Before the end of the day, the Belgians launched a second intervention, this time in the city of Loloabourg, Kasai. This prompted Lumumba and Kasavubu to visit the town the following day. However, despite the Belgian intervention, the crisis in this newly independent nation had only just begun. In Katanga, the Belgians had now established a foothold and began to disarm and expel all non-Katangese soldiers from the province. Then, on the evening of July the 11th, CONACAT leader and provincial president of Katanga, Moise Tshombe, declared the secession of Katanga from the rest of the Congo.
Vu que nous n'avons pas la confiance au gouvernement qui vient d'être constitué à Léopoldville et présidé par M. Lumumba, nous avons pris comme décision de déclarer l'indépendance du Katanga.
Fatigued by the central government's nationalist ideas, Tshombe viewed the Katangese as separate from the rest of the Congo and condemned Lumumba's dictatorship, labeling him a communist. When news of the Katangese secession reached Lumumba and Kasavubu, they flew to the province to examine the situation for themselves. But upon arrival, the president and prime minister were met by a surprising turn of events. The Katangese Minister of Interior, Godefroid Monongo, refused them permission to land at the airport. He boldly stated that whilst Kasavubu could visit if he pleased, Lumumba was forbidden from entering the territory. Fuming with anger, the president and the prime minister had no choice but to retreat. Tshombe had now consolidated power and disbanded the ANC from Katanga. With the backing of Belgium, he formed his private military force, the Katangese Gendarmerie, and placed them under the authority of Belgian officers. Tshombe's secession was fueled in part by the Katangese longing to hoard the wealth from their lucrative mining operation, denying the rest of the Congo its share. The Belgian mining company Union Minière du Haut-Katanga had exclusive rights to Katanga's copper mines. Largely owned by Société Générale de Belgique, a powerful holding company in Brussels with close ties to the Belgian government, the UMHK played a significant role in the rebellion. To aid Tshombe's secession efforts, they provided him with an advance of 1.25 billion Belgian francs, equivalent to approximately $25 million in 1960, or a staggering $256 million in today's currency. However, even within the newfound state of Katanga, unity remained elusive. In the province's northern districts, the Baluba population fiercely resisted Tshombe's secession. Led by J.C. Sendwe, the leader of the Balubakat party, they flatly rejected Tshombe's overtures to join the rebel government, choosing instead to align with the government in Leopoldville. Assigned the post of Katanga State Commissioner, Sendwe valiantly strove to restore the central government's control over Katanga. However, his efforts ultimately fell short. On July the 12th, Lumumba sent a telegram to the Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, emphasizing the need to address Belgian military aggression in his country and their overt support for the Katangese secession. As a result, on the 14th of July, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 143, demanding a complete withdrawal of Belgian troops from the Congo and replacing them with a multinational peacekeeping force under UN command. And so, one of the largest UN peacekeeping missions, the United Nations Operation in the Congo, ONOC, was created. Initially, Lumumba and the central government welcomed the UN troops. However, a swift disagreement soon erupted when the Prime Minister demanded that the UN troops be used to suppress the Katanga secession. The altercation stemmed from Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, which limited ONOC's mandate to maintain law and order within the Congo. The UN regarded Katanga secession as an internal affair and refrained from intervening to uphold Congolese sovereignty. Disagreements over what the UN troops could and could not do would continue throughout ONOC's deployment. On July the 22nd, Lumumba embarked on a critical trip that took him to Washington to solicit support from the United States. Unfortunately for him, the US refused to support his cause and took the position that all assistance from the states would be channeled through the United Nations.
The position of the United States government on this point is unequivocally clear for itself and for others. Despite, because as I've said, despite an official request from the government of the Congo some days ago for United States troops, we insisted that all American help be channeled through the United Nations.
After failing to secure support from the major Western powers, Lumumba returned to Leopoldville. However, upon his arrival, Albert Kalonji, the leader of the MNCK, declared the independence of the southern part of the Kasaï province located slightly north of Katanga. Centered around the city of Bakwanga, he calls it the mining state of South Kasai. Kalonji claimed that the Baluba people in the Kasai region had long been persecuted and needed a state in their traditional homeland. He appoints Joseph Ngalula as prime minister, but the relationship between the two would start to deteriorate and Ngalula would go into exile the following year. Kalonji also garnered support from none other than Belgium. Like Katanga, the region of South Kasai had important mineral deposits and housed another Belgian mining company called Fominier. As a result, the secession of both Katanga and South Kasai now deprived the central government of approximately 40% of the Congo's revenue. Frustrated by the Western powers' refusal to help cool the rebellion, Lumumba sought support from the Soviet Union. This move confirmed the suspicion of the US government, as they had previously seen him as a communist. And so, Lumumba had now positioned himself as an enemy of the United States. Larry Devlin, the CIA station chief in the Congo, described the following events as
a classic communist takeover.
In the end, the Soviets supplied weapons, logistics and material support and dispatched around 1,000 military advisors to the Congo. Consequently, in late August, Lumumba took a decisive action intending to launch a significant offensive against South Kasai before proceeding to recapture Katanga. Fueled by Soviet support, a vanguard of Congolese army flew to the Kasai region on August the 23rd. With reinforcements from a garrison at Loloaborg, they began advancing into South Kasai. The following day, Kalonji departed for Katanga to seek assistance from Shombe. But that very night, the ANC troops entered South Kasai territory and faced minimal opposition from the ill-equipped and poorly trained Kasayan soldiers. In the end, they successfully captured the capital city of Bakwanga on August the 26th. However, lacking supplies and adequate transportation, the soldiers resorted to seizing civilian vehicles and food from the Baluba natives in preparation for an advance on Katanga. These soldiers then carried out a series of massacres against the Baluba population. The scale of the violence was so extensive that a small Tunisian ONOC detachment in Bakwanga proved incapable of containing it. South Kasayan soldiers were forcibly removed from hospitals and executed, while civilians attempting to flee to remote neighboring villages were pursued and killed. As a result, about 3,000 civilians lost their lives and tens of thousands were compelled to seek refuge in neighboring regions. The massacres in Bakwanga triggered international condemnation, leading the United Nations Secretary General to describe them as
a case of incipient genocide.
Meanwhile, in Katanga, Kalonji organized a new army to retake South Kasai. With the assistance of the Katangese troops, they launched a counter-offensive in the town of Luputa. When they entered the town, Kalonji's troops began to indiscriminately murder the civilian population. Their counter-offensive was eventually stopped by the ANC. However, with the help of the Katangese gendarmerie, the Kasayan troops managed to successfully repel the ANC's incursions into Katanga. Throughout August, President Kasavubu grew increasingly concerned about Lumumba's growing authoritarianism and the escalating prospects of a civil war in the Congo. Furthermore, his relationship with the Prime Minister has significantly deteriorated. As a result, on the 5th of September 1960, he announced the dismissal of Lumumba, Deputy Prime Minister Antoine Gizenga, and 5 other ministers over the radio. He then appointed Joseph Ilio, the President of the Senate, as the Prime Minister and entrusted him with the task of forming a new government. When the news reached Lumumba, he took to the radio to defend his government and in return deposed Kasavubu. He argued that Kasavubu had not obtained the approval of any responsible minister, rendering his actions legally invalid. Fearing that Lumumba might fly in loyal troops from Stanleyville to regain control of the capital and ignite a civil war, the ONUC commander stationed in Leopoldville ordered the UN troops to close the airport. Eventually, the Congolese parliament convened to address the issues and voted to invalidate the declarations of dismissal made by Kasavubu and Lumumba. Regardless, on the 10th of September, Ilio proclaimed his complete government. Kasavubu then ordered the army to detain Lumumba, but General Victor Lundula refused to arrest him. As a result, the president dismissed him and appoints Colonel Joseph Mobutu as the new army chief. Now the commander-in-chief of the Congolese army, Mobutu had grown to be very influential. To the shock of the entire Congolese populace, particularly President Kasavubu, Mobutu effectively carried out a coup on the 14th of September and announced the dismissal of the president, the respective governments of Ilio and Lumumba, and the parliament until the end of the year. Additionally, he ordered all Soviet advisors to leave the country and announced the establishment of a college of commissioner generals led by Foreign Minister Justin Bomboko. However, not everyone supported the coup. Maurice Mpolo, the Congolese Minister for Youth and Sports and a staunch supporter of Lumumba, attempted to undermine the coup. As a result, Mobutu arrested him and Deputy Prime Minister Antoine Gizenga on September the 23rd. But under pressure from the United Nations, he released them the following day. Later, Gizenga left for Stanleyville. Meanwhile, Lumumba continued to hold meetings with members of the government and political supporters, asserting his continued hold on power. This angered Mobutu, who had now begun to align himself with Kasavubu. Resultingly, Mobutu ordered his troops to surround Lumumba's residence, but a cordon of Ghanaian UN peacekeepers prevented them from carrying out an arrest. And so, Lumumba was effectively placed under house arrest. Towards the end of the year, many supporters of Lumumba began to flee the capital for Stanleyville, where Antoine Gizenga, the deposed deputy prime minister, was establishing a rebel government. Following this, Lumumba resolved to join Gizenga in Stalinville and lead a campaign to reclaim power. On November the 27th, he departed the capital in a convoy of 9 cars, accompanied by his wife Pauline, his youngest child, and 2 of his ministers,
Remy Mwamba and Pierre Mulele.
Instead of making a swift journey to the border of the Oriental province where Gizenga's loyal soldiers awaited him, Lumumba opted to touring the neighboring villages, resulting in significant delays. Unfortunately, on December the 1st, while attempting to cross the Sankuru River in Lodi, Mobutu's troops, under the command of Gilbert Pierre Pongo, caught up with him. The soldiers promptly captured his wife and child. Refusing to abandon them, Lumumba revealed himself to the troops and was immediately arrested. However, Mulele and Mwamba managed to evade capture. The next day, Lumumba was brought back to Leopoldville and transferred to the Camp Hardy military barracks in Tillsville. Meanwhile, Joseph Okito, another close political ally of Patrice Lumumba, who briefly held the position of the second vice president of the Senate, was also arrested en route to Stalinville. In addition, Maurice Mpolo had also intended to join Gizenga in Stalinville. Before his departure, he addressed a crowd of Lumumba supporters, but news of his rally quickly reached Mobutu, who immediately dispatched troops to apprehend him. Mpolo was subsequently transferred to the base in Tillsville, joining Lumumba and Okito.
Patrice Lumumba comes back to Leopoldville a prisoner. The former Congo premier, who was captured when he fled inland, no longer wears the tuft of whiskers on his chin that helped to identify him. His arrest provoked several clashes between Lumumba followers and Congolese army troops. But Congo's strongman, Colonel Joseph Mobutu, shown as he watches Lumumba arrive, says he is prepared to put down any uprising. At the same time, the Soviet Union has been demanding Lumumba's release and immediate talks at the United Nations. Mobutu enjoys the sight of Lumumba being tied up more firmly for transfer to the garrison town of Tillsville. A soldier tries to stuff into Lumumba's mouth a crumpled speech asserting his claim to power. The former premier shows no emotion. It may be the end of a chapter, but not yet the end of the Congo story.
Back in Stalinville, on December the 12th, Antoine Gizenga announced a new government based in the Oriental province. He called it the Free Republic of the Congo. It immediately garnered support from China and the Soviet Union. Gizenga was also joined by Lumumba's former army commander, General Victor Lundula, who arrived with troops loyal to him. In the early morning of Friday the 13th of January 1961, soldiers stationed at Camp Hardy, where Lumumba and the other 2 were being held, became uncontrollable. They refused to take any orders unless they were paid. Fearing that the soldiers might set Lumumba free, Mobutu, Kasavubu, Foreign Minister Justin Bomboko, and Head of Security Victor Ndeka arrived at the camp and negotiated with the soldiers. It had now become evident that keeping Lumumba in the camp posed too great a risk. To make matters worse, rumors began circulating that Gizenga had begun to prepare troops bound for Leopoldville to release Lumumba. This prompted a decision to transfer Lumumba elsewhere, with Katanga being considered as the primary option. Although no one harbored a stronger animosity towards Lumumba than Albert Kelonji, who now sought revenge after the massacres in South Kasai and would gladly receive him, the authorities were concerned that the Ghanaian UN peacekeeping force stationed at the Bakwangan airport might impede the landing of the plane carrying Lumumba, or worse, attempt a rescue mission. As for Shombe, he had not yet permitted Lumumba in Elizabethville, preferring the Balobakat leader, J.C. Sendwe, who was also in custody at the time. However, after being influenced by Belgium's Minister of African Affairs, Count Errol de Asperemont-Leyden, Tshombe relented and agreed to the plan.
Belgian interests require the final elimination of Lumumba.
Fortunately for Tshombe, the UN peacekeepers stationed at the Elizabethville airport only supervised civilian air traffic, granting Katanga full control over its military transport. As a result, they could not disrupt Lumumba's handover in Katanga. Finally, on January 17, 1961, Lumumba, Okito, and Upolo were flown to Elizabethville. They were brutally beaten on the way. When the aircraft touched down at about 5 p.m., Lumumba found himself facing an impressive array of the Katangese forces. Also amongst them were the highest echelons of the Belgian army. The Katangese police commissioner, a Belgian by the name of Frans Verschoor, who had previously accompanied Lumumba to jail for inciting a riot in Stalinville, was noticeably absent. He was summoned that afternoon by Tshombe and told to be ready in the evening. Verschoor had now secured a place for Lumumba's detention, an empty bungalow belonging to a farmer by the name of Lucien Broways, which lay 2 miles down the road from the Elizabethville airport. Back at the airport, Captain Julian Gate, a lower-ranking officer and Flemish head of the military police, also the passengers from the plane to a waiting vehicle. Lumumba and the 2 others did not disembark in good shape. Subsequently, the convoy brought the prisoners to the Broways building where the beatings continued. In the meantime, Tshombe and his cabinet were holding a group meeting. Ultimately, they resolved that Lumumba and his 2 accomplices must be eliminated before daybreak. Tshombe and some of his cabinet members then drove to the Broways building. This time, they met with Lumumba and tormented him for the last time. Verschoor had accompanied the African officials but remained outside until 8:30 p.m. However, when Tshombe and his ministers departed, he loaded Lumumba and his accomplices into the back seat of his car. The motorcade then took the road to Jadotville, a distance of 80 miles where Katanga's penitentiary was located. At about 9:30 p.m., they arrived at their destination, somewhere in the middle of the bush. In the darkness, illuminated by the spotlights of military trucks, Captain Julian Gate and Verschoor, along with other Belgian servicemen, issued the fatal orders to the soldiers. Verschoor took the 3 men, one at a time, out of his car. He led Okito, then Umpolo, and finally Lumumba in front of a shallow depression. Each prisoner had a firing squad of 4 men. While they shot Okito, Verschoor screened the 2 others and said,
"It will soon be over. Say your last prayers."
He then handed over Umpolo, who made the sign of the cross, dropped to his knees, and spoke,
"Our Father, who hath in heaven, hallowed be thy..."
The shots came in the middle of his prayer. Verschoor was now alone, screening Lumumba, and said to him,
"Please forgive them and say your prayers."
But Lumumba did not speak. He remained silent from beginning until the end. One by one, their bodies were rolled into a pit and buried. Subsequently, Katangan Interior Minister Godefroid Monongo, not wanting a burial site for the bodies, oversaw a final solution. He ordered members of the execution team, led by a Belgian gendarmerie officer by the name of Gerard Soit to dig up their remains and eliminate all traces. Without displaying any sign of remorse, Soit and his men took 2 oversized glass containers filled with sulfuric acid and a large barrel made of acid-resistant metal and dissolved the corpses in them. The ordeal took 2 days and nights to complete.
He had good strong teeth, so I kept them as a souvenir. We did things an animal would not do.
Then, on February the 13th, Munongo announced to the press that the villagers in the bush had captured and killed the 3 men. However, he did not disclose the location of the incident or where the 3 men had been laid to rest.
I'm going to speak frankly and bluntly as I usually do. We shall be accused of having murdered them. My reply is, prove it.
At the announcement of Lumumba's death, furious protests took place around the world. In a blistering rebuke, the Soviet Union blamed the imperial powers and called for the United Nations to leave the Congo. Indeed, the Cold War influenced Belgian and American acuity on Lumumba. For seeking Soviet support, they feared Lumumba's increasing susceptibility to communist influence. However, it remains a fact that Lumumba appealed to the Kremlin only as a last resort after the UN and the United States refused to help him. In the late 20th and 21st century, investigations have been conducted into Lumumba's assassination. In a 1999 interview on a Belgian television, Soit presented a bullet and 2 teeth that he claimed to have preserved from Lumumba's body. Furthermore, a 2001 report also uncovered several plots by the United States and Belgium to assassinate Lumumba. Among them was a CIA-sponsored attempt to poison him. In 2020, Lumumba's daughter appealed to King Philippe of Belgium to return her father's tooth, describing him as a hero without a grave. Consequently, on the 20th of June 2022, Lumumba's gold tooth was returned to the Congo and buried on the exact day marking the 62nd anniversary of Congo's independence.
We believe that the only way to keep the Cold War out of the Congo is to keep the United Nations in the Congo. And we call on the Soviet Union to join us in thus ensuring the free and untrammeled exercise by the Congolese people of their right to independence and to democracy.
Although the Congo had lost its first prime minister, the crisis was far from over. In the ensuing years, it would witness the United Nations immersing itself in a fierce struggle, fighting relentlessly to safeguard the integrity of the newly independent nation.